what I found is that my passion is for natural healing. And when it comes to that, that's what I want to do most of all. So if you don't know me, my name's Collan Koeppen D.C. D.C. means Doctor of Chiropractic. And I'm joined by my good friend, Pam Gardner, who will be coming up after me. She's right here. She has a story to share, and she's a highly respected and amazing entrepreneur, and somebody I've always wanted to collaborate with. And of course, wrapping this up will be Dr. Carlos Rocha, Doctor of Physical Therapy, and he'll bring the post-concussion protocols and everything that I want to know. So actually, I'm coming here to tell my story and be inspired and also learn. So I'm here to learn as well. So if you see up here, you see the video about my story. I don't do this so I can play a video that I've already recorded about my story. The reason I'm doing this is the visual of the heads up top. Because to sum up, the first picture, the black and white, was when I was 18 years old. And it looks like I'm crooked, and it looks like I'm crazy and miserable, and I could go on and take up all the time that we have together going over how many problems I had, how many diagnoses, and all these other things. First of all, I want to say that I was not medically diagnosed with a concussion. Some people in here were, but I wasn't. So when I looked back, I thought, something wasn't right. So what was it? And then I heard the stories from family, because this is an interesting point. If you have a head injury or you have one where you lost time, because I remember losing time, and how do you know you lost time if you lost your memory of it? So you either have to have technology, something recording you, checking your watch, or people around to show you that. So I heard the stories of the big loud thump and then the baby crying. A mother's in the next room, and she listens. Boom, 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 wah! Goes into the room and goes, how did that 7 to 9 month old climb out of that crib? And he's not even old enough to do that. How did that happen? Well, after enough times, if you saw the flyer that I put on there, that little old looking baby on there, that's me. Because mama came in and took a snapshot of me, whoop, climbing over the crib and jumping for it. And when you climb out and fall out of a crib, when you're this tall, that's a long fall. And you got a really big, heavy head proportionally. Chances are, if you don't fall directly on your head, you're gonna give it a good hit. And that brings up the question of, how do we know how many impacts? Let's say it's not a concussion, I'll call it an impact. How do you know how many impacts you've had? You have to ask family members, you have to have a history. So then you think, okay, well, let's start from the beginning. Birth can be traumatic. And when you add up these small, moderate, medium injuries or traumas or impacts over time, the average is 1,000 by the age of 13. And I was shocked to hear this. And then I started thinking about it. Okay, well, there was the birth I don't remember. There was flying out of the crib, falling on my head multiple times until they caught me on a Polaroid. People ask me, why didn't your mother catch you? She's taking a picture of you. No, I don't blame my mama. You know, it's the point is, and then I saw a picture of myself at 2 years old with 2 black eyes. And I said, well, what happened there? It's like, oh, you 2 boys had an older brother. Bullies. Did anybody here have siblings? Older brothers, perhaps? Anyway, if you had, you'll know that any day could be you flying helplessly through the air, or a brawl, or you name it. And you're not necessarily in control of all that. So then I had this picture I saw with 2 black eyes, and I said, what happened? Oh, you fell down the stairs. And then when I was going through treatment, I had an emotional revelation. When I started getting work done on my neck and my skull, I had an emotional flashback of myself and my brother, and I said, what is this? So I called up again and said, do you have any more information about me falling down the stairs? He goes, oh, you and your brother, you were just up and down the stairs all the time. And you know, you didn't pay much attention to it. It was all the time. You're just running all the time, like 2 boys running around. Well, there are times in life where I have a strong feeling that I may have flown face first. And it wasn't necessarily just running up and down. But there's things that happen in life. My point is, there are things that happen that you can't necessarily go back and see. You can't necessarily prove, because I don't know if anybody's, extremely young here where their entire life has been on Facebook Live or Instagram or all been recorded, but when I was younger, there were not video cameras in every phone in every household. So a lot of things happened that were not documented. So then you think about that. Okay, birth to 2 years old. And then I think, okay, well, I lost time. Maybe I haven't had a serious concussion, but I lost time. Flipping the bicycle. I don't know what happened. I thought I did some great jump. I looked around and said, I've been out for a few seconds. Where's my bicycle? And it lands right on my head. And oh, there it is. Luckily, I wasn't seriously injured. But those are all just cumulative. You know, the occasional punch to the head or kick to the head or the accidental elbow in basketball and all these different things. But the real lost time that I remember vividly that I'm sure had an impact was going head-to-head in football, which they have outlawed. I don't know if any of you have paid attention to that. The spiking, I mean, they taught that to us when we were young. They're like, all right, just put your head down, put it right in that quarterback's belly or put it right on his head and take him out of the game, that's fine. They don't care. They were coaching that. If you look back to the old coaching, you'll find that's true. Anyway, there was a time when I went down head-to-head. My friend ended up putting his head down at the same time. I lost a few seconds here. Got up and it was okay. I was like, okay, you just think it's a school of hard knocks. But then there was a time in the game. And this is the game where the entire team, it was a kickoff, punt. Somebody caught the ball on the other team, started running this way. Well, something happened. He started running the other way. The whole team was over here, but I saw it, and I started running this way. The whole team's trying, they can't catch up. He's turning the corner, running as fast as this person can. I'm coming this way, running, and there's lingering people here, and he doesn't really see me coming. And I'm coming at full speed. I come down and put your head down. When you put your head down with a helmet on, all you can see at most is the person's toes, lower body, etc. Well, anyway, I put my head down, and I felt something. And then I looked over here. I don't know how much time I lost. But I looked over to the sidelines, which are right on the edge of the room right here. And I looked over, and it was like they slowed down the movie. It was like, and the people were jumping in the air and they're excited. And then I saw my coach, and it goes from slow time, great hit, oh, awesome. And I looked over and I go, did I get him, coach? And he goes, yeah, that was awesome, great hit. I looked over that way, about 7 to 10 yards down, there's some guy laying near the sideline right by the whole team, the guy that had the ball that was running this way. I don't remember how he hit, but all I remember is I lost time, and I came to, and it seems like a normal thing, but now we're realizing these incidences, if you want to call them, these patterns of impact, whether they're micro traumas, medium, significant traumas, however you categorize those, however they're diagnosed, they do have an impact. So last story on lost time was this guy. See that the black and white picture? That's me at 18 years old. Well, in 18 years old, if you see it says USMC ID under there, they put you in a boxing ring from here that goes about as far as an arm can reach. And then they put the other guy in about as far as the arm can reach. And then there's your drill instructors yelling at you. And one part of it is you have to punch the other person for 30 seconds straight. And the other person can't punch back. And then you get to take turns. And then the person punches you for 30 seconds and you can't punch back. So you'll lose a couple seconds here or there. Try not to get hit doing your best. But when I look back at this and add up all these injuries, it makes me appreciate the power of the healing that's within yourself. Because one thing I've found is that it was a journey for myself to find a specialty that first unlocked my neck where it was out of place. I had major pressure, headaches, sleep problems. I couldn't sleep for more than 4 hours at a time. It was better just to get up. My body hurt so bad. I couldn't sit down. It changed my career. I had to find a career where I couldn't sit in, where I wouldn't sit down. I had a whole body pain syndrome. It was like a male fibromyalgia, even though that's rare. It tends not to be in males. But anyway, this guy, his whole body hurt from head to toe. Couldn't sleep. had trouble digesting, serious behavior, and of course that started 10 years prior with a significant neck injury. Besides all the lost time, there's an independent injury it's a neck injury, so I don't want to go over all that today, but there is a very significant where my head was stuck to the side and it almost broke my neck. So 10 years before that picture, I had a significant neck injury. Anyway, long story short, middle picture, I started getting worked on with traditional chiropractic. It turned the power on. And then it took me longer to find specialists that could get specific work done, to get the top of my neck right, and to also move the skull and keep the body where it wouldn't throw me out of whack. So that's part of what I want to touch on today, is that I got from terribly unhealthy, my brain wasn't even developing like a normal person. It took me a lot longer to even mature normally because of that, in my belief. Anyway, so I could call myself a late bloomer and say it's fine wine. I can make all these analogies, but at the end of the day, I think it had a lot to do with that. Anyway, so I found people that helped me start the natural self-healing process. And the whole fundamental philosophy of this is that the body has the ability to heal itself. And we need to tap into that ability, do as much as humanly possible to assist the body to heal itself. And when we do that, and we remain diligent about what we're doing, we find that we can continually improve, not just get to where we're okay, not just to get no pain. It's one thing to be miserable and have no pain. That's wonderful. But I want to go from miserable to having your ideal life. That's part of my purpose in general, is to help as many people as possible regain their health and maintain their health and improve. So the other thing I'm going to touch on is the other picture. This is a skull. So one thing I didn't realize, and this happened actually later on. I was doing great, but then I realized I had a deviated septum that never fully cleared. It was helped by a lot of things I was doing, but I did an advanced procedure, which I'm not going to talk about today. This is a video from that. But the reason I'm showing you this skull that's blown apart, not that I want your skull to look like this. The reason I'm showing you this is because the skull moves like the plates of the earth. If you studied the earth, I used to think the skull was like a bowling ball that had holes drilled in it. Eye, mouth. They're just, it's a solid chunk. And that's not true. They move like the plates of the earth in their circulation. What I'm finding out from research with lymphatic and fluids and all this new data that's coming out is that when the fluids don't flow back and forth between the brain and the body, when the power doesn't flow between the brain and the body, those fluids and the proteins can sit in there and cause degeneration and essentially rot inside the brain. That's why we need to make sure the circulation is flowing and make sure the power is on. Because when we have the power on, the power inside of you is what heals you. It's not some kind of magic, it's not the magic scrubs that heal you. It's not, it's not that. It's the innate, internal, inborn power inside of you that can heal you. So we're going to do our best to show you how to do that and have methods and be inspiring and bring that to you. So this is just to show you how the skull works and how the pieces move and how it's not a fixed thing. So I wanted to make sure to bring our distinguished friends and guests here. So if you're ready, Pam Gardner a friend of mine and has a great story to share. So come on up. Screen here. Come on in. I don't want you to call this. Okay, I'll just minimize that. Good.
And thank you, Colin, for reminding me of the childhood injuries that I had that I'd forgotten about because we're all hit multiple times. I'm Pamela Gardner. I'm the president and CEO of Biotech Vendor Services. It's a company that I've had for 15 years. And it's interesting because I'm working with a coach, and it's all about mindset. And what he said to me today is, you will not talk about your headaches, your concussion, anything for 30 days. And I said, well, coach, I have to tell you, I have to do a presentation tonight on concussions, so you have to give me one more day. So anyhow, here we are. I remember that day very distinctly on October 2nd. It was 2017. I was going to aerial yoga, and I was that stressed out entrepreneur, and I just kept saying, I want to get done with my projects, I want to get done with my projects and get on my cruise. And I went in with that attitude going into yoga that day. And at one point, wasn't doing anything fancy in aerial yoga, but I was leaning back into the silk wrap. And I felt like I just wanted to leave the world for a minute and relax. And I think at some point I fell asleep, I fell backwards, and didn't realize I was falling until I hit my head. And they came over and said what happened and put ice on me and walked back home, and had my daughter check out my eyes, etc. And nothing looked wrong with my pupils. But I just thought, oh, okay, I need to rest tonight. But I had big projects going on, and didn't want to let my clients down. So I traveled. I realized I probably wasn't good enough to drive, so my colleagues drove me up, and I was present enough to direct everything that I had to direct. And then I went on what was kind of like a meditation cruise, but still we had to, fly to Florida, then go down to Mexico and walk around. So clearly I didn't take it easy. And when I came back, I just was not feeling good. So I went to the ER, they did a CAT scan, and they couldn't find anything, but the doctor's like, you need to take it easy, etc. So then I decided, okay, I'm gonna actually take it easy for a month, not drive, etc. And during that time of just slowing down, and I actually met Renee today from New York, you really start thinking about what's important to you. And I was involved with this women's program, and it was about determining what is your why are you brought here, etc. And I realized during that downtime what my bigger purpose was, and that was to empower women. And because I was already in the science field, I started a series called Women Breaking the Barriers of Science and Their Male Champions to address sexual harassment and discrimination. And I did those. So that was one of the blessings that came out of the concussion, is just reevaluating life, etc. Also, something I left out is one of my neighbors, when she heard what happened to me, she said, you should go to Dr. Collan, and he's great. And I'd gone to my other chiropractor, and he was actually cracking my neck while I had a concussion. I was like, this doesn't feel right. And so I went to Dr. Collan, and it was actually really great. And that cranial facial release that he was talking about, he's like, hey, do you want to get balloons stuck up your nose? And it's gonna be this kind of weird experience, but it may help to clear your brain fog. And I said, okay, at this point, I'm tired of having the fog. I'll do whatever, stick balloons up my nose. And so it was weird, because it was almost like somebody's dragging you through underneath water. But I felt a little bit of relief, and then all of a sudden on Thanksgiving, I was around everybody, and everything was in a bit of a fog, and then the fog kind of lifted, and I'm like, oh gosh, I feel so much better, and kind of cruising along, etc. And then in February, on Valentine's Day, somebody backed into me, and so it wasn't like a major thing, and it didn't even look like anything was on my car, but it shook me up again. Saying to Colin, okay, it looks like we have whiplash, etc. And then it sets you back again. And then, I don't know, hit my head on the dryer, and then something else happened. It seems like every 2 to 3 months, just keep injuring. And then it would almost like I'd go back to where I was. And 3 weeks ago, I was driving the car at night and went around this 50-mile-an-hour curve, hit into a sign, and the sign fell into the car. Could have been much worse. And so once again, I was like, oh my gosh. And I was just going through so much frustration. I was mad at myself. I was like, why did you do this, etc. And then I started working with a coach that actually worked on mindset, and I just was aware of my state of being. It was like, okay, you're frustrated, you're angry, you're this, that, and I just processed all the emotions that I was having. And at that point, I had a breakthrough. And Colin does this this testing. What's it called again, Colin? The brain test.
Yeah, it's heart rate variability and brain waves.
Yeah, it's called heart rate variability and brain waves. And every time I went in and we did the test, my brain was red, which meant it was like under a lot of stress. The brain waves patterns were not like, maybe I was more in delta versus theta and gamma and the other ones. But after like having that breakthrough where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let go and stop focusing so much on what's happening and putting so much pressure around the injury of when are you gonna get better, etc. We did the test, and the test turned out green and blue, which means very clear. And my brain was like completely coherent. And I was like, wow. And so that's why my coach actually said, no more talking about it, this story's done. And I said, well, what about when people say, do you want to go hear a concert or whatever? I have to tell them I can't because of my head. He goes, no, you don't. You just say, not at this time, I don't want to go. And what I realized is I was programming almost into my head that I'll never be able to go to rock concerts again because the noise bothered me. So for me, it's not like this horrific thing where I have constant headaches or problems, but it was just this fog. And when you're used to performing at a really high level and being a high achiever, it was just this fog that just drove you crazy. But in the end, you know, I've just sort of said, you know, I have to heal. And so instead of trying to do everything on my own, I have an assistant that's now typing for me, which keeps me off the computer so much. Something I should have done a long time ago, but finally I'm there, and it's all about, to me, about healing and taking care of myself and believing that I'm gonna get better. So for me, it's been 1 year and 4 months. Probably if I had rested at the beginning, I would have gotten better, I assume, sooner. But I've gotten, you know, the 4 or 5 injuries, and so that's where we are. And from now on, I'm getting better and better every day in every way, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. I wasn't going to go over the procedure about balloons. It's technically called cranial facial release. It internally adjusts the skull from the inside out through the nasopharynx. It doesn't go into any sinuses, and it takes the inside of the skull and moves it out. Because I can do a lot from the outside in, but from the inside out, it's also where healing comes from the inside out. And this procedure, although if you don't really need it, I don't do it for fun. I wasn't even going to talk about it today, but since she brought it up, it's its own thing, so you can talk to me about that later. But let's introduce.
I did it twice.
Yes, and I actually do it to twice a year for myself. But that, you know, we'll save that for another special time. Maybe I'll even demonstrate that someday live, and we'll see how it goes. But let's get up Dr. Carlos Rocha, Doctor of Physical Therapy, to go over post-concussion protocols.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Colin, for having me here today. Really appreciate you guys coming out. We're going to get into some meat and potatoes of everything today. I'm hoping not to bore everybody too much with some of the science. I want this to be a dialogue, so if you guys have questions as we're going through, stop me as much as you want, ask questions. I want you guys to follow along. I tried not to make it too heavy, but heavy enough that you guys are going to understand a little bit more about what's going on during the healing process, what's going on once you've had a concussion, and what's going on with people who have persistent concussion symptoms, and what we're going to be needing to do in order to really help these people to get better. Because this is a pretty common thing that we see overall with people who've had a concussion And we'll go into how common it is shortly here. All right, so just kind of outline everything really quick. We're briefly going to go through some pathophys, so the science of a concussion, what happens when you have a concussion immediately right after, what causes a concussion, how does it happen, what are the mechanics of it. A lot of the information, I'm just going to preface this right now, a lot of the information on this whole presentation was based off of two main things: the Berlin Consensus Statement, which basically was a major statement made in Berlin back in 2016, with all the major developed nations, health organizations got together, and they really put down some literature on what really do we know about concussions, and what are some recommendations with how to treat concussions from a scientific evidence-based approach. This stuff, a lot of the aggregate of the things that we've got going on here have been put together by a group called Complete Concussion Management. It's an organization out of Canada. That organization is run by Dr. Cameron Marshall. He's actually a doctor of chiropractic. He is really, really good at what he does. He can explain these things a lot better than I can. I'm going to do my best, but if you guys have more questions, or you guys are somebody at home who's injured and recovering and looking for this for information, I would definitely point you in the direction of looking for a CCM specialist in your area. And then we're also going to go over assessment and treatments, and then what a treatment strategy should look like for somebody who just had a concussion or have had persistent concussion symptoms. So this is me, a little bit about myself. I work down here in La Jolla. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, as Dr. Collan said. I run my business right off of Fay, right a couple blocks from here. This is some of my information, if you guys are interested. So why is this important? When me and Colin got together and we started talking about this, one of the main things we really wanted to get was good quality information out to the public. So unfortunately, there's been a lot of misinformation and not enough information about concussions that's kind of reciprocated out there in the public. You've got movies like Concussion, probably you guys have seen it, that really kind of take a really strong polarized stance to concussions, but there's not really a whole lot of evidence in that, and they do a little bit of misrepresentation when they actually do talk about the research in that. So we're going to get into a little bit of that today. And then the other things are really simplistic kind of approaches to treating concussion. You guys may have seen this, so if any parents or anything are on the sidelines, a lot of times you'll see, if in doubt, sit it out. Well, there's a lot more than just sitting out, right? Sitting out that game, sitting out that week. What is it, right? Like, what should we expect from ourselves and from our athletes once they've had a concussion? And do we understand what is going on with that person, that we can actually help these people to make good decisions for their own health moving forward? So what else here? So one of the other things is classically we have been prescribing people rest, and I've heard it a lot today already. Rest, rest, rest. And we do prescribe rest, all right? When you look at the research, we do prescribe rest, but it's a much shorter duration than people give it credit for. Usually what we say is 24 to 48 hours of true rest. Staying off your feet, being laid up, getting that rest, giving yourself a chance to reset is what we recommend. Outside of that 48 hours, we're generally doing two things. We start working them into the return to learn or return to work protocols, eventually back into a return to play. And we'll go over that stuff later on. But there is a gradual increase in activity and exposure to symptomatic stimulus that we want to start approaching people to. Too often we have doctors who are unfortunately uneducated in this stuff, and their number one recommendation, just rest, just sit at home. Oh, you're having light sensitivity. Well, go into your room, right? Sit in your bedroom, be in a dark room, right? If you're sensitive to light, sit in a dark room. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a matinee before, but when you go to a matinee in the middle of the day, and you come out after you've been there, it's maybe the middle of the day, you walk outside, it's bright, it hurts your eyes. So by recommending patients in the past with concussions to go into their rooms and sit in dark rooms, and they already have light sensitivity, and then sitting them in a dark room and then expecting that they're going to get better, we're actually doing these people a disservice, not a service. So we do want to obviously have a certain level of rest, But that rest does need to be limited. And we're going to talk about how much it's going to be limited today. But we do want to also be trying to gradually expose these people to their stimuluses, which do symptomize them, but in a sub-symptomatic threshold, right? We don't want to push it so much. Or with the reading, right? The screen time is another thing that I've heard a lot today. It should be off the screens. We don't recommend people to be off the screens anymore. What we recommend people to do is start taking diaries, right? How long can you be on a screen before you start having symptoms? Start writing that stuff down. Start getting some data on where you're at so that you can start building up your tolerance over time. And that should be the goal, right? Is us getting better, us healing ourselves, us being able to have some hard data on some of these things. Good. So, what is concussion? We've talked a lot about it today. We've heard a lot of keywords, impact, right? Hits, blows, all these things. I kind of have a definition up here, which is pretty well accepted. So concussion is an impact injury to the head or neck, which is caused by rapid acceleration, deceleration, causing the neurons, so the neurons in your brain, so everybody knows the neurons are the cells of the brain, right? To essentially stretch or shear. So I have a picture up here of a brain, right? And if you guys remember back to 10th grade biology, we've got two types of matter in our brain. You guys know two types of matter?
Gray and white.
Gray and white, right, okay. So gray is that outer part, right? That cortex, that redder part in that picture.
Okay.
White is a little bit more in the middle, right? We used to think that, and that's kind of my next slide here, we used to think something like this happened when you had a concussion. You had a coup contre coup injury. So you can kind of see this picture, and if you search up Google and you search concussion, this is what you're going to get 9 times out of 10. Is this? This is still propagated throughout like the media, throughout internet, throughout resources. It's still propagated. This picture is what occurs, and people see this and they're like, oh, my brain's getting bruised, right? This would implicate that there's something happening on the gray matter or the cortex of your brain, the outer part of your brain. Concussions do not happen on the cortex of your brain. A concussion is a stretch or shear injury because of acceleration, deceleration. That happened very quickly. We're going to go into, I got some good videos to help you guys understand what we're talking about here. But just to start off with kind of where we're at right now, you guys do need to know that it's not something that happens on the outside of your brain. It happens in the junction between that gray matter and white matter, okay? And why is, what the big problem that we see with concussions, specifically the rehabilitation process of concussions, and what we're considering might be one of the big reasons why people have long-lasting neurodegenerative effects of concussion, is that there's a major disturbance in the energy processes of your brain. So once we have a concussion, there's a major drop in how our brain is able to produce ATP, okay? Our brain is very, very hungry for ATP. And once it's not able to produce ATP, or energy, right? So you guys know energy, right? ATP. Once it's not able to do that, they're at an energy deficit. And you guys spoke a little bit earlier today about how tired you were, how tired you felt after. That's very, very common after a mild traumatic brain injury. And that's exactly what a concussion is. It's a mild traumatic brain injury, all right? And there are specific differences between a mild traumatic brain injury and a moderate traumatic brain injury that we're going to look at today. But just so you guys know that there is essentially an energy deficit that's occurring, which leads to fatigue from a metabolic standpoint, as well as some inflammation that's occurring in the brain, and a few other mechanisms which we're going to talk about today. Okay, so back to this. Coup contre coup, right? We have this idea of a bruise versus a stretch or shear, okay? There is most of the information we're looking at now is if we look at like magnetic resonance spectroscopy or the MRIs and stuff, what we see is that injury really occurs at that junction, not on the cortex. So I want to kind of get a video up here, so I'm going to skip up a little bit to here. And I want to show you guys a picture I have, or a video I have here, which kind of will do a pretty decent job at showing you guys what kind of occurs during a brain injury, or a concussion. So, if you guys notice, this is kind of a good idea because the brain is more like a pot of jello, okay? You guys can kind of see how there's like a wave-like effect that occurs on the brain there, right? And that's really a better idea when you think about all of these little cells, all these little microscopic cells that are occurring. This is probably the best picture that we have. And if you see the white matter versus the gray matter, skip, okay. So this is the gray matter up top, and the white matter is the axon, right? So we have our cell bodies in the gray matter, white matter there. We're seeing this picture. This is a picture of somebody who actually had a car accident, and this was during some type of legal dispute. But look at the junction up at the top left, first of all, and you'll see there's a separation that occurs here between the white and the gray matter. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the stretch or shear. Those neurons are getting pulled apart, and look what happens when it comes back. Along the back end of the skull, you get that stretch or shear, that separation of those two layers. And that's what occurs when that happens is that there's a major impulse that occurs with respect to all of the neurons in the brain. Essentially, there's an action potential, right? Your brain thinks that all the neurons should be firing at the same time. So we describe it as an electrical storm, right? So that's the first phase of concussion, all right? What happens is the excitatory phase of concussion is when the impact happens, we get that shearing across that gray and white matter membrane, right? Those neurons are stretched, and we send this giant impulse across your entire brain all at the same time. And this is why when people get up from a concussion, they're so disoriented, because they're getting all of this information all at once. And yes, they're not able to understand which way's up, which way's down. You know, they have sometimes they'll have an emotional response. They'll get really emotional. We'll talk about all of the different symptoms you see upon initial impact of the concussion. But just so you guys know, that is the first phase of concussion. That's what most people think of when they think of concussion. That's where most people's understanding of concussion pretty much ends, unfortunately. The majority of the rehabilitation process doesn't happen there. The majority of the rehabilitation process happens in the secondary phase. So just to kind of summarize, excitatory phase is that immediate short period right after the impact, right? That's that electrical storm that we talked to, and then we get that huge action potential that's sent across. Now the second phase, which we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about today, is the spreading depression phase. Now the spreading depression phase occurs after we've had that initial impact, where we've had the shearing, and there's an overall loss of how your brain is able to produce and absorb ATP, or the molecules that it's going to provide it the ATP. I'm not going to get into all the mechanisms of it today, because it's a little bit much for this setting, but there's a lot of things that occur along the cell membranes, essentially, that wind up putting you in a position where you're having to be forced to use your anaerobic respiratory system, your anaerobic metabolism, okay? So because of that anaerobic metabolism, you guys think of anaerobic, that's your sprinters, right? Really short duration, 10 seconds in duration, versus aerobic, your marathoners, right? We're not able to produce that long withstanding energy anymore. So because of that, people are tired, right? And they need certain things. We're going to talk about what those things are in order to help to develop their energy systems better while they're rehabbing and keep them out of further injury. So, initial signs and symptoms after you've had a concussion. And I've got some videos to kind of go over what to look for as well, too. So we're going to kind of go through some of these. Loss of consciousness is probably one of the big ones, but it's absolutely not necessary to diagnose a concussion. You do not need to lose consciousness in order to diagnose a concussion. Seizures, vacant stares, delayed verbal and motor response, confusion, disorientation, slurred speech, gross incoordination, irregular emotional responses, or memory deficits, loss of time, right? There's actually a list of about 22, I think, different symptoms that can occur directly after a concussion. So this list is not all-inclusive. These are just the most common ones that we see. So we're going to go into
Question.
Sure, yeah.
So, do you need much force to actually have a concussion?
Great question. So back on that first slide that I had defining concussion, there's about 70 to 120 Gs of force that are needed in order for you to have the shearing effect that you need to create a concussion. So much force. it's really going to be dictated by several things, right? It's going to be dictated by your speed, the speed of something coming at you. Also, there's a lot of research to show that how well a person can react can dictate somewhat of whether or not they're going to be concussed. A person who can see a hit coming sometimes can react in a fast enough way that they can actually reduce their chances of concussion, is what some of the research is actually showing. But to answer very specifically, unfortunately very scientifically, 70 to 120 Gs is about what we see for a mild traumatic brain injury to occur.
That's a lot.
It's a fair amount,
What would that
right?
relate to?
What's that?
70 Gs to 120, what is that, like a car accident? How fast are they going when they hit you?
And now I'm digging in here to my own brain, but I think that if you're unexpected, I think 15 miles an hour in a car can give you a concussion.
That's what I
if
wanted
it's
to know.
unexpected. I could be a little bit off on that, but I think it's right in that range. Yeah. Yeah, does that sound right to you? Okay. Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
One more.
Yeah, sure.
And when you talked about the kind of electric shock, do you feel it? You can feel it throughout your body when
You don't feel it. So you don't have pain receptors in your brain. So you're not going to feel anything, but your brain knows it happened. And the effect of that shearing along those axons have happened, right? And then the long-term effects are already in play, right? So you're already in that secondary phase by the time that you're usually gaining consciousness. Yeah. So I'm going to put up a couple of videos right now of different examples of concussion. Some of these are a little bit graphic, so I just want to just preface that before I get into this. So if anybody has a hard time seeing some of this stuff, please look away, okay? But I think it's important because there are certain things with these mechanisms of injuries you guys want to see, and you guys should notice. And you'll probably wind up seeing like different hits a different way too.